Why do I get up in the morning? That's just too far fucked.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number, looks like it's 379 of the UFO Buster Radio Report. And today, this is what we normally call the Thursday Night Freakout, 10 p.m. CST. And we have a special guest with me today. And wow, what a body of work, I like to say, that our guest has today. And help me welcome Jeremy Norrie to the show. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure being on the show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great. And listen, I know that you have so much to talk about when it comes to this topic. But not only that, but you really are someone that's trying to discover, I guess you could say, the truth.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely part of my whole fascination with this. Is that I've been into these subject matters for a long time, and I've personally gone back and forth with kind of what I thought was real and what I thought was maybe not real. And so I'm into all the other films and other TV shows and everything that people do about the subject. But for me, I wanted to make sure that we kind of just dug right into the core facts, the things that are most compelling as evidence. And, there actually is a lot of compelling stuff that sometimes gets left out. And, a lot of times these shows are kind of sensationalized and there's all this ominous music and it's kind of like,
right.
They play it down almost themselves. And for me, they're serious subject matters to a certain degree. So why not approach it with kind of a serious attitude?
That's right. So, by the way, let me just say hello to the folks that are live in the chat box right now. We've got Pucky, we got the Norm, we got Green Man, we have Game Vet, and we also have Gooter. And, of course, Dre actually managed to join us today. Thanks for joining, Dre. So the one thing that I want to make sure that everyone really is aware of your body of work. So what I did was, in the description, folks, if you are listening to the podcast or listening to the replay, if you're not here live, you can go in there and see basically the body of work that Jeremy is putting together. All of it can be found on Amazon Prime Video. And let me tell you, I've already taken in 2 of them, and we're going to have a conversation about one of them specifically. But Jeremy, let's just talk about, let's go back a few years back. And how did you get started just in the realm of creating these documentaries?
Okay, so it's kind of an interesting story.
Okay.
I used to be in the cannabis industry. I live in California. And I have been into that just kind of recreationally since I was young. And I went over to Amsterdam and I learned all about the different seed companies and all the different strains and flavors. And I had all these experiences with it that made me really passionate about it. And then it helped me with some of my health problems too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a long time doing all kinds of things in that industry. And then kind of near the end of when I kind of have gotten out of it, so to speak, we were throwing an event that was a traveling competition for hash makers. And I don't like to use the word illegal, but it wasn't necessarily legal. There was no sort of
semi-legal
permit that I could get to do this sort of thing back then. And so we knew it was really special. So we started filming the different events to kind of make a documentary. And gosh, that's almost 8 years ago now. And
wow.
So I went through a lot of ups and downs trying to make it. And it was a learning process for everybody involved. And, finally we got something out of it, a few years down the line. And I was really happy with a lot of the things about it. And, as I started kind of shopping it around, I learned all the mistakes that we had actually made. But I wasn't getting anywhere with all my contacts in the cannabis industry that have like films or TV shows or whatnot. I was
right.
When I was making this, I thought those kind of people could lead me into, getting the film somewhere. But that didn't work out. And eventually, a friend of a friend of a friend, I just was pestering these people so long that said they could help me that one of them just kind of threw a phone number at me, and he's like, "I'm too busy. Call my friend Paul, and he will help you." And that ended up being the door that opened all this for me. I showed Paul what we had, and he looked at it and he thought it had potential. And then he started kind of cluing me in on what I needed to do to start making it happen. And we're still in the process of fixing it and completing that project. But, in talking with Paul, I started telling him about some of the other things that I wanted to do. And he knew another producer, my co-producer on all of these films. His name is Jason. And his company is Zapruder Flicks. And so he's been filmmaking for like 25 years or something. He's like very, very experienced. And he's actually really good at a lot of the things that he does. And he, heard about some of the things I wanted to do. And he wanted to do those subjects too. So
these guys that you initially connected with in the cannabis industry, were they like just too laid back?
I mean, that's part of it, but it also has to do with like the film industry parallels the cannabis industry kind of in its earlier stages,
right.
Where I think they know a little bit what they have to lose if they're too open with, getting into the industry. And so there's a little bit of like, I'm forgetting the word, but you kind of have to be apprenticed into it to a degree. It's like a brotherhood, and once you get the right person that kind of gives you a window, that gives you a chance. And it's still, even from there, very difficult to get into it. And what I'll say, it's been getting more and more difficult with platforms like Amazon for independent filmmakers. Like, you might see a lot fewer films about like UFOs and all that kind of subject matter because they've dropped the amount that they pay independent filmmakers just like maybe 4 times in the last 2 years. It's really, really unfair how bad it's gotten. But saying that, there's all these new platforms too that are coming out. And who knows, maybe somebody else will kind of pick up and start paying independent filmmakers better, and it'll be better for everybody. Yeah.
So was the cannabis filming, was that like the gateway drug into aliens and Bigfoot, or did you actually have an interest before?
You know what? I think I was interested before,
Okay.
and even just in general as space, it does something for me emotionally. In California, we have a museum that has the space shuttle in it.
Hmm.
And every time I walk in the room with the space shuttle, I like get choked up. And I wish that I was an astronaut, and I have a moment, it's a real emotional connection that I have with just outer space and science fiction and all of that. And that's been since I was a child, I loved Star Wars as like a very little kid. And, all of that made me interested in the subject matter. And then kind of as you grow up, and that's what I mentioned before, I stopped believing that it was like real at a certain point, and it wasn't like a moment where I said, oh, you know what, this stuff's not real and I don't believe. It just kind of, as I got older, it became more evident that those things that I was into as a kid were kind of fake, fictional stories. But and especially Star Wars, as you get even older, some of those things start to seem real. And
Right.
you start to think, wow, you know what? Maybe they were onto something that I just didn't kind of realize. And one time I do remember specifically getting back into the UFO subject matter, and it was semi-cannabis related. I had a friend that was coming over from out of state somewhere, and I forget, he was either working or doing something, but he wanted to stop at my house and get some cannabis and then go on his way. And so he drove some far distance, and in that drive he got Coast to Coast on the radio.
Okay.
And the guest on Coast to Coast was James Gilliland. And so he had done some great interview on there, and there was a replay of that interview. And he was telling me about it, and I kept, I was a skeptic at this point, and I kept asking him, kind of skeptical questions. And he had really reasonable answers for almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of that conversation, my mind was reopened to the subject of UFOs. And, it's still open,
Yeah, it really is quite a hot topic as of late, to maybe the last 3 or 4 years. So when you decided, listen, I am going to get in here and I'm going to make a documentary about UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, cryptids, whatever it is, how do you make that decision, and who do you bring in with you to get in that topic? Or is it difficult?
So it is somewhat difficult, but it's also somewhat easy, depending on kind of your personality. I always did really well in English class at school. And I was good at kind of like organizing my thoughts for papers, So if it was like, a topic where I had to write a paper about some sort of subject matter, I was pretty good at that. And so when we kind of approached these projects, that's kind of what we did. I went through, the subject matter of Bigfoot, and I just kind of researched it as if I was doing a paper on it. And I kind of broke it down as to like, what are the categories that I find, compelling and, the most interesting or believable evidence. And then, what are some of the hotter topics that are, in the subject matter? And then kind of conclusively, where would it go to kind of like end this and have it just be, okay, Bigfoot exists or whatever,
Right.
And that's basically what I did. I watched films. I did, research on Google, and I read a couple books. And, I just looked into things that were kind of the popular subject matter on Sasquatch and all the different, cryptids related to Bigfoot. So, and I approached the other film the same way. And it helps that I'm genuinely interested in it too.
Mm-hmm.
I watch all the other shows, and I'll sit through almost anything. And in doing that, you kind of pick little bits and pieces from all these different movies and what have you, and they have real quality parts. too. A lot of them, even if most of it is kind of ridiculous, sometimes they kind of show you something, and it's really interesting.
Right. Yeah, there's always like a little something that just kind of grabs onto you that you can, it almost kind of gets your curiosity going, you know, and you want to look at it a little more.
So one of those things is how I did it. You know, if I saw something on a show that was interesting, I would then write that down, and then I would look it up. And I would try and read a few different things. And one of the things I also like to do is I like to try and read what the story is. You know, what's the narrative? What's the debunk on this? And then I like to make my own mind up if that sounds believable or if it sounds, you know, a little far-fetched. And, you know, a lot of time, more often than not, the explanations are believable. But there's certain ones that are, you know, ridiculous even, where it's obviously untrue.
Yeah, they get to the extremes.
You know, yeah. You know, you feel like, okay, well, this is obviously not true. What are they hiding? And you know, the first conclusion is, oh, well, obviously the story is real. So, you know, who knows if that's really what's going on. One of the things we talked about in our documentary is a subject I didn't even realize existed until I seen that documentary about Richard Doty and Mirage Men, where he had kind of admits to faking UFO stuff,
right,
kind of to protect national security. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, oh, okay, that actually seems like a completely reasonable thing. I would not put it past our government to be doing this sort of thing. And it really makes everything more difficult. So, you know, if there were UFOs that they weren't able to explain, it really helped make that seem ridiculous if you had kind of fake UFO stories that you kind of brought up. So,
yeah. So do you think that the whole national security angle is just a bunch of bullshit, just kind of to derail the conversation in a way?
So it's got to be one of those situations where sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not true, right?
Right.
And you know, the question is, how often is that happening? Is it like all the time? Is it more often not true than it is true? That could very well be. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's like most of the time it is some sort of government thing, and you know, every once in a while they don't know what it is. It seems to me like these recent ones that were the Nimitz sightings, where, you know, it's the popular thing, have made it on all the mainstream shows and everything, and that seems to me to be authentic. I truly believe those are real UFOs. They didn't know what they are.
Right, they're definitely UFOs, no doubt about that. So here's a question. When you're making these documentaries, have you ever had a guest, you don't have to name them if you don't want to, where you're like, who the hell booked this guy on here? Can somebody please get him out of here?
So I'm very forgiving. I know my partner has felt that way, definitely. But, you know, for me, you know, in one of our recent documentaries, we're doing one about kind of the compare and contrast between UFO culture and Bigfoot culture, and kind of where those subject matters overlap and kind of where they're very different. One of the guys we interviewed for that was, I'll say, a very difficult interview. And, you know, I did not like the guy. He's a very nice guy and everything, but man, I'm the one who does the interviews generally for all of our documentaries. And so sometimes you're just sitting there and you're like trying to pull it out of somebody, you know. Other times people don't shut up. We've had that also, where I'm like just kind of waiting for my moment to cut in and you know, get the subject over to what I'm trying to talk about. People like to just start telling you about their life. So,
and they go on a tangent and you just don't know what to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So some of the documentaries that we have listed for Amazon for you, where you're listed as either like an associate producer, a producer, co-producer, director. Let me just read some of these off. Rescue Me, a Home for Spot documentary. And this is from 2019. What was that one about?
So that documentary is basically my partner Jason did that documentary. My role in that is significantly small. So, but the concept of the thing is it's a dog rescue, and that's kind of a popular thing now. People kind of understand what that is. They're basically trying to find homes for dogs that are, abandoned or just troubled animals like that. And from what I understand, it was very good for them. And it's I love dogs, animal stories, like, they always get me. Movies with any sort of dog in it, oh man, I love it.
Right.
And it's super hard if they the dog dies in the movie. It's like heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of, it's a heartwarming story about all the good work they're trying to do at this dog rescue.
So it's funny because we go from dog rescue to cannabis on the list.
So that's where really my subjects come in, right?
Yeah, okay. So we had cannabis versus cancer, cannabis and your doctor, and about cannabis and cancer. So it seems like you did a lot of the medicinal side of cannabis in your documentaries.
Yeah, so that's going to be an ongoing theme for us. We're going to start approaching that again. The first 3 films that Jason and I did together that were kind of my subject matters. I'm not just learning about films from Jason. So it was kind of a test to see if people were going to be interested in this or not. And we kind of approached it as one film originally, but then doing the films, you start hearing these people's personal stories, and they are just epic.
Right.
A couple of their journeys through this are just, heartbreaking tales and just what you would call like a hero story, where, they face adversity and then they overcome it. And in a couple cases, they don't overcome it. And so, in doing all the things that I was doing in cannabis, one of the recurring themes that you would have, a lot of it was fun and just purely recreational. But then every now and then, especially in the earlier days, you would meet people that this was authentically medicine for them. It was undeniable. And, they were really suffering even still, but this was making life, bearable. Like, they weren't visually as suffering as they probably once were. They were happy, as bad as it was. And you start to realize there's healers, a lot of people that are out there kind of giving cannabis away to these people that need it, that clearly can't afford it also. So it was one of the things that I always said to myself, like, if I get an opportunity to start working in the film industry and doing TV shows, I want to bring some attention and some exposure to the medical side of cannabis again, because if you're deep in the culture, you realize it's getting completely forgotten about now that money has entered into the cannabis culture.
Right.
And it's really a tragedy to see, like, there was a while where you couldn't even give cannabis away, as a legal company. And it's really the opposite direction that I'd really like to see the whole thing going. So we wanted to tell a few of these healers' stories and kind of show that, and even going through this, like, when we first released Cannabis versus Cancer, Amazon flagged it for dangerous medical advice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we had to have like a whole thing with Amazon to where we're like, listen, first of all, there's a disclaimer, okay? So all responsibility, even if it were dangerous medical advice, is on there. You should not be flagging it for that. And then secondly, like, come on, what are we talking about here?
Right.
And it became a whole situation where, if you've been in that industry, you realize how primitive a lot of people's mindset still is with that subject. And so we did these 3 different documentaries. One, the Cannabis versus Cancer, is kind of like it's got a 4-step plan that you could just watch the film, and it'll tell you kind of how to battle cancer with cannabis. Pete has had a lot of success with his kind of 4-step plan, and it's not all cannabis. Like, there's diet stuff basically, or the other 3 steps.
It's like the whole thing. You got to work on all angles in order to make it really work for you.
That's absolutely true. And, you know, even then, it's still, you have to be kind of fortunate that it does still then. But so that one's kind of got the plan. The second one is called About Cannabis and Cancer. And that's kind of a story of one of the original kind of people that got into the medical marijuana field in the original days. I like to call them pioneers. And so he was a medical pioneer. He was kind of giving away cannabis at one very early stage. A lot of the people that he worked with were some of the very original people. And a lot of his stories are not wonderful endings because it was really difficult for a long time. Like, people didn't even understand what cannabis could do. And, like, you know, certain things, it was a learning process through the last, you know, say 20 some odd years of kind of how it all could work. Mm-hmm. And even still learning. But now we have a much better understanding of kind of what you need to do and what's not really that worthwhile. And About Cannabis and Cancer, or I'm sorry, Cannabis and Your Doctor, rather.
Right.
That is a story of the physician that we have. So one of the people I interviewed, I knew a lot of people aren't going to believe this just from the healers. They kind of have to hear it from an authentic doctor that is practicing, you know. So we found one. And she is an ER doctor, but she also does cannabis work, and that's kind of her passion. And so in that process, she has a whole program that she was promoting for other doctors, other physicians, to learn about cannabis, because it's not a required thing for them to learn about in any sort of way. And they don't even get any sort of benefit from learning about it. So she created a program where they get some credits that are somehow usable in their career.
And I would think that if you're in a state that allows you to use medical marijuana or even to use it, every day to buy it legally, then you want to have your doctor schooled on it.
You would think so. And as a doctor, you would think that you would just want to be up on that kind of thing, because you have patients that are clearly coming in that are using cannabis, especially now that it's recreational. I mean, you got to start learning about it and what you can do with it, because now you can theoretically, maybe you still can't prescribe it, and maybe that's part of why they don't learn about it, but that's a whole other topic.
Right.
You can now, as a doctor, say, hey, I think you should use cannabis. Go out to the dispensary and buy some and use it this way. You know, if you were educated, why not? You know, it's so much better than approaching things from a pill perspective. Right. You know, I feel like that should be last option.
Exactly. Natural options, of course, we should always go to the natural option, only because the medicine, pills and stuff like that, they have such a big impact on things like liver and your body chemistry and stuff like that. So it gets a little crazy. But after the whole cannabis documentary section that we just went over, we went into UFOs and Bigfoot. So which one of those was first on the lineup?
Bigfoot was first to be released, but in reality, we have a whole bunch of different subject matter films that are coming soon or like in the process of being completed. And so what had happened was we released all those films relatively close to one another. And we kind of just sat and waited to see how they were going to do. And in that time period, we didn't make anything new. It was kind of a folly. We should have really been just continually working on something, but it didn't work out that way for some reason. Mm-hmm. And Jason contacted me, and he had said he'd been doing some research, and he was telling me these are the subjects that are really popular for independent filmmakers. are any of these subjects things that you're interested in that you think we could maybe make a film about? I'm very resourceful, especially with the cannabis stuff. I just have a huge network of people that I know. So he started reading off these topics, and it was like, oh yeah, I'm into that. Oh yeah, I'm into that. So, and in doing those topics, we've kind of also stumbled upon other things that kind of went along the lines of some things that we wanted, stories that we like to do. Jason and I are kind of similar personality-wise in that, like, we really want to not just make money, but tell wonderful stories about people that are doing great things and, like, kind of empowerment situations. And there's a lot of the darker subject matters are what sells, and some of those are really compelling stories, but some of the other things that don't get a lot of attention are like one of the things we're doing is a bullying documentary where we started, before we started the Bigfoot one, I started a bunch of different martial arts documentaries.
Oh, really?
My background before I was into cannabis, I wrote for a bunch of different MMA websites. It was very small back then, but all the main ones now, they're called MMA Weekly. I wrote a weekly column on, and SureDog. Those are some of the major sites. I even wrote for the UFC for a little while. So I have connections in that world too. I trained in different martial arts myself, and then you kind of see throughout life how beneficial a lot of that stuff is for other things in life.
Right. Wait a minute. So is cannabis a gateway for MMA as well?
In a way it was kind of, but in a way it wasn't. Like I was definitely into that stuff before I was into cannabis. I liked even Chuck Norris movies as a kid and that kind of stuff. But they all kind of overlap. It's like the most bizarre thing. Cannabis does have this nature of kind of finding its way into everything, basically. And so I'm very open about it, and so as I'm open about it, people kind of open up to me. And so a lot of my journey is like cannabis kind of led me into this other subject, and then I'm doing that other subject, and then it kind of led me back into something maybe cannabis related. It's really odd. But we were doing these 3 martial arts things, and one of the martial artists is somebody I knew through the cannabis world. And the story, the story of the martial arts thing is kind of like the difficult journey that fighters have and all the ups and downs and how crazy that world kind of is for up and coming fighters. Then I also wanted to do one about women's pro wrestling. I know another girl,
there you go.
cannabis, that is a woman's pro wrestler, and that's become really popular lately. And it's really wonderful to see kind of the new ground that like they're breaking. I saw in that they had the first women's match in Saudi Arabia. That's amazing, So really cool things like that.
Wait, so what? Wait, hold on a second. Saudi Arabia. So what would they wear to the match?
They wore like a full outfit covering themselves.
Really?
And this was like this was WWE. Like this is the mainstream wrestling, like the biggest one there is. And, it really, really cool to see that kind of stuff. And they do a big event there, and they had the girls come out, and they wore stuff basically covering themselves, but they cried after. It was amazing. That kind of stuff is, really, really incredible for them, and great to see, right? So, but in doing that, one of the girls we interviewed for the wrestling thing, she had this bullying story that led us to a bullying documentary about her and how she kind of overcame that whole challenge as a child. And so before I got to do these Bigfoot ones, there was all these kind of martial arts related and athletic related topics.
Mm-hmm. So recently today, and we kind of talked about this earlier a little bit. Today I actually watched one of the alien themed documentaries, Alien Contactee, and your main person. The person you're interviewing is Dr. Loius Turi, and his story, just in the way he was relaying it, was incredibly fascinating to me. And so I wonder, because during the documentary, I swear I never see him take a breath. He was like nonstop talking. What was that experience like? And tell me a little bit about your interactions with him.
So Dr. Turi is the nicest guy. I couldn't say enough about how welcoming he was to us. The reason that I was able to do all those other ones before we got into this subject was because
don't say cannabis.
We were waiting for this festival that they do up in Big Bear Lake, California. It's called Alien Snowfest. And they have a bunch of guest speakers that come out, and it's a whole convention, like a UFO convention. And the gentleman that throws that was, very instrumental in both Don't Call Me Bigfoot. He kind of introduced me to a couple of the people in that. And then also our other film, I Want to Believe, and Dr. Turi. And so before we were going up there to do the conference, I emailed all of the different speakers, and Dr. Turi is one of the only ones who wrote me back. And he was
really?
Yeah. And he immediately was on board. He wanted to do an interview, and he was just a really welcoming guy. And so he would tell you that somehow he knew psychically that this was a good thing, But to me, it just seemed like he was really nice. Mm-hmm. And we came up to do the conference, and we came and talked to him. He had a booth at the event with all his books and different things that he's done. And you start to learn about his life, and we were talking to him, and they're like, what, this actually there's a lot of information here. Maybe we should just come down to your hotel room and do a whole thing. And he was, very into that. And so we kind of did our work for the day. And then I know my partner was tired, and we went over to Dr. Turi's hotel room, and it was a little warm, but we figured we were going to do about an hour. We did about a little over, I think, 2 hours.
Oh, really? So the actual documentary was filmed in his hotel room?
Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of the B-roll and stuff like that we did, that's filmed all over the place. None of that comes from the same place for the most part. So the stuff that we did for Turi, and that documentary is a rare one where we just have one interviewee basically, and it's just him kind of talking the whole time. But as you said, he's an animated guy. You kind of get his story, and wow, he's all over the place, And so me as the interviewer, I'm asking him questions, and he just goes off on a whole tangent, and he's telling me about this part about his life and about this part about his life. And he's so passionate. You can't stop him.
Yeah, you really can't. I could tell just by the interview. But there were things that he was talking about in the interview that I would think getting back into this topic, some of that must have been like fucking shock and awe for you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I like to use the term hard to believe.
Right.
But he believes it, so there's part of you that's sitting there and you're feeling this coming off this guy. And, he 100% believes everything that he's telling you. And that's compelling. I left there kind of not knowing what to think about it. And there's some stuff I still don't know what happened. Maybe he was misunderstanding something, or maybe he wasn't. Maybe it was just something that I've never experienced.
Yeah, and it looks like he really knows his stuff about Nostradamus and things like that. But the part that really kind of made me feel like I needed to know more about him, his perspective, was we kept on talking about the reptilians and the Draconis, and I was like, what is he talking about?
Okay, so some of that for me is symbolic. Maybe it's not he might think that it is real. I don't really know exactly what he thinks, but just the simple concept of that, for me, is a real thing that I think almost all of us believe, is that, there's a good kind of part of us and there's a bad part of us, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
And as human beings, you kind of go through life and you're tempted in all kinds of different ways to kind of get into certain different mindsets where, maybe you have to kind of get into, especially, maybe you're doing some sort of violent profession, or you're a soldier or something. You got to get into a mindset where you're ruthless. You're like almost like an animal, and in the opposite way, maybe you're like a kindergarten teacher, or you're working with special educated kids, and you got to put yourself in a mindset of like really total understanding, and he's kind of describing it in a really interesting way, right?
Oh, sure, he is. Yes,
I do believe in that concept.
So here's a question for you. If you're sitting there, so you say you've got because the documentary was like a little bit over an hour, maybe like a minute over an hour.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's it's a little over an hour.
Yeah, and so you had 2 hours of it. So you're cutting it down. How difficult is that? Because it looks like he just dumped the entire universe on you in those 2 hours.
So honestly, I could never do it without Jason. This is where Jason's expert. Jason used to be an editor for Fox. He is really good. And so I am blessed to be working with my partner, Jason, on that. But it is difficult. I've sat through an editing process, and you kind of got, you got to go through it similarly to what I was talking about before, where you kind of lay it out. You're looking for similar things that people are saying. Usually you don't have one guy like Turi. It's actually a lot more difficult when you've got multiple subject matters talking about multiple different things, and you kind of got to piece it all together to tell a story so that the viewer is sitting there and you're kind of following along through the whole thing. It's not just kind of pieced together and you're all over the place. So, Turi had a little bit of a reason to his rhyme. He did have like a chronological order of his experiences happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
Just he did kind of get a little tangenty on certain things, and you cut a little bit of that down, and you'd be surprised. It's a lot easier than you think. In that
so what did you get out of that interview personally, as far as your exploration into the topic?
So me personally, it kind of opened my mind to like the way I looked at some of these things, because like certain things like astrology, I am a little bit more conventional when I look at that kind of subject matter. I think a lot of the predictions are not necessarily very specific, or it's like I also like magic, and I like this subject called mentalism. And once you've kind of dealt with mentalism and you realize, we're actually really simple-minded creatures in a lot of ways, if we can be suggestible through like actions and just kind of certain things that you're just not even conscious of, kind of leads most people towards like thinking a certain way. That's really a crazy thing. And I think a lot of like predictions, like psychology or psychics rather, and astrology and things like that kind of play on that. But I also think that there's more to life than we know. And I've had my own experiences where I felt like I knew something before it happened. Right. And I don't know what happened there. And I'm not like, as dialed into that. And I'm open-minded to the concept of somebody kind of devoting their life to that kind of mindset and having experiences that I haven't had. And maybe they're kind of tuned into a part of life that I'm not tuned into. I could never do any of these magic that these magicians do.
Right.
So, maybe there's more to it than I originally kind of was letting on.
Yeah, and it looks like Dr. Turi, that really is kind of like his message that you really want to look into it, but at the same time, there are some people who are so analytic and so away from it that they may not just be ready for that.
Oh, this is when we did the film, we knew, certain people are going to look at this and they're going to say he's lying and it's all fake and whatever, Right. It's the nature of kind of how we all are as humans, like a lot of people believe in UFOs and things like and aliens and whatnot, but how many people believe in this other stuff, like that people are having contact or being abducted, and it's a lot harder to believe some of those stories. So that's what we're getting into.
Mm-hmm. So I got a question for you from the chat, the live chat here. It's coming from the Norm. He says, what is the most bizarre paranormal related incident you've ever seen, and how did you feel about it?
Okay, so I have a couple. I had like a one-time an experience when I was in my 20s where I woke up in my bedroom and I felt like there were gray aliens in my bedroom, and I kind of paralyzed, froze, and I got under my covers, and that's all I remember about that, and I have no other proof about it. And it seemed also like maybe I was imagining this and it wasn't kind of what I thought. So that's a strange one. But I also have an experience where I was driving back from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and I had been watching shows and on UFOs and things like that, and I was looking in the sky, and I saw something that was moving in the sky, and so I pulled my car over, and I'm like looking at this thing in the sky, and I watched it for so long, I eventually ran my car out of battery, and I had to call like AAA to come and get me. But in sitting there, I saw it clearly. It moved in the sky, and it was different kind of color lights. And now looking back on it, it was probably a satellite, is what I saw.
Yeah, so you debunked yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like to do. Is I'm not just here to like believe in the story and perpetuate sort of fake thing. I want to find out what's really factually the truth. And there's enough of that out there that is real facts that you don't have to like pretend, Yeah,
and it's right. You have to have a bit of skepticism about the topic. And some of the guys in the live chat might say that I hate certain things about the topic, but I do, because that's the skeptic side of me that just doesn't want to believe it because it's just not solid. It's not good evidence, and it's really hard to believe.
Yeah, if you've ever been in that experience where you're telling somebody about something and then you kind of get proven that it's not true, you feel like a real idiot. And you don't want to repeat that over and over. So, So
here we go. So we've got the current work done. So here's the question now. What holds for future documentaries? What kind of topics are you talking about? What kind of things you were researching? What can we expect from you?
So first, let me give a little advice to anyone who wants to support independent filmmakers. It really helps us if you watch the films all the way through to the very end. And if you go on the different platforms, including IMDb, and rate it and review the film, and try to be honest. Don't, even if you hated it, don't just give us a 1. Try and find something that you liked about it. And
opening credits were great.
We've got to have done something. I mean,
right.
So, that's what helps us the most. And then, of course, sharing it with all your different friends and sharing it multiple times if you can do that. A lot of times you'll share it once and think everybody saw it, but only a couple people saw it. So it helps to reshare films, especially if you really like them. So we have a number of different topics for the future. One of the ones we are about to complete is psychedelics as medicine. So it's really a popular topic, hallucinogenic mushrooms and, different things used medicinally to kind of combat different mental problems and other ailments that people are having. And it's becoming evident that these are really effective tools and complete authenticity. So I think that's a really wonderful subject matter. A couple of the people that we know, Eddie from our About Cannabis and Cancer is deep into the psychedelic medicine culture. So we interviewed him, and there'll be some other people. We need to do a couple other interviews and complete that project. We are doing a Cannabis Pioneers project about some of the original people doing all this stuff when it was completely illegal, no medical, no recreational, no nothing, and very scary in America. So and other places too. And so we're doing a Cannabis Pioneers documentary. We're doing one of the best things that we've shot, and this is probably my most mainstream thing. We're doing a cooking show about cannabis. And one of my concepts being deep in cannabis is you see all these cooking shows, and they're kind of like, oh, we're using cannabis to cook, and you hear the different flavors of cannabis, and maybe you have this misunderstanding that somehow that flavor is getting carried over into the food. It's not. Cannabis, as far as cooking with cannabis, is almost nothing to do with the actual flavor of the cannabis, except like maybe a general flavor of all cannabis that sometimes is evident in food. So for me, my concept is kind of pairing different flavors of cannabis with different kinds of food. And we shot a show for that, and we shot it with really good cameras, a huge crew. It's really a professional done show, and I'm hoping that goes to somewhere like a Netflix or maybe like a HBO or Showtime or somewhere like that. But that one we're still working on, and then we have a couple other subject matter. We're going to do a mindfulness documentary about it's kind of like this new therapy that people are doing, kind of like counseling to a certain degree that you can kind of do for yourself about reminding yourself of how to be grounded and how to kind of let things go and accept things for what they are and be very present in the moment and it's a really great thing for a lot of people. We have a couple other ones, I'm sure.
So are you ever heading into the paranormal at all?
So we have that compare and contrast of Bigfoot and UFOs, and we were talking about it. We want to do an experience-based film for both subjects. So rather than just kind of talking about what the greatest evidence is, I want to hear some personal stories of some people that have experiences that they can't explain on both subjects, Bigfoot or any other kind of Bigfoot. If you happen to be in skunk ape territory or any of the other places with a similar kind of creature, we want all those kind of stories to do another project. And same thing with UFOs. And now that we've done this thing with Dr. Turi and his Alien Contactee, we might do abduction subject matter. It seems to be something people like, and if we can kind of approach it from a serious perspective, gives us a little bit of a different twist on quite a lot of the other stories. So
yeah, it sounds like you got a lot of stuff coming down the pipe, and I'm sure everyone would actually, even after watching these two, I'm going to be interested in seeing a lot of these. So keep up the good work. It is fantastic to watch, folks. I have the links to the trailers in the description, as well as links to Jeremy's social media profiles and things like that you can follow him on and stay up to date to when these new projects come out in the future. So any last words for the folks before we end the episode?
I'm, looking to do as many interviews and other podcasts as possible, and I just really appreciate all the support. I thank you for having me on greatly, and keep supporting independent filmmakers. Thank you very much.
Jeremy, I thank you for coming on today. Folks, like I said, check out the links in the description. As always, I thank you for listening and sharing the podcast as well. That is it for today. We'll catch you next week on UFO Buster Radio. Ciao.